Welcome to From Pixels to Celluloid, a podcast dedicated to the discussion of video game adaptations.
Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen of the North, South, East, and West, and welcome to From Pixels to Celluloid, a podcast about video game adaptations. I'm your host, the Hyperson55, and I'm glad you decided to join us for this nice little discussion. It's been a while since we did the last episode, but we're back and we're ready to cause some chaos. And yes, I say we because we've brought back our wonderful friend Vincent. Say hello to the audience.
Hey, it's been a hot minute.
So how you doing, sir?
Pretty well. Just came back from holidays and now catching up on a bunch of shows and just getting back into the way of things.
Nice, nice. I was on holiday also, but that was a few months back. Got the retouch back thing. I fail at words. Let me try that again. I touched back in Vancouver for the first time in a while, and it was like very nice to catch up with Vincent and a few other people. I went for a wedding, and that was super fun and just good vibes, man. So I've been back here, and things haven't been as fun back in the UK, but I've been up to all sorts of things, including watching a few video game adaptations here and there. Some really good, some are questionable in content, and we also have a very interesting feature we're going to be doing later on in the episode relating to X-Men 97, which will be a slightly different twist on the regular format, but I think you'll enjoy it. So yeah, look forward to that later on. But how would you wish to proceed?
Well, you were speaking about all the video game adaptations that you've been checking out. There was Fallout, the really highly acclaimed adaptation, almost to the point where like the people that I'm hearing rate it a bit higher than The Last of Us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I think the interesting thing about the Fallout TV show is that before it came out, there was a lot of people talking, but then there was also some that didn't think it was going to be worth their time. I remember the trailers coming out, and some were convinced, but a lot of people were apprehensive because the show wasn't going to be based on any specific story from the video games. And also, as per usual, if there's ever a story where there is a female protagonist, there are people that are going to start making noise about this being different to the games and blah 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 blah, and why they inserting women to lead roles and stuff. And I was just like, come on, mate, it's not even out yet. Just give it a chance. So but for me, I was always interested in this show because it was going to be, I think it's executively produced by Jonathan Nolan, and I think it was his wife who were the people behind the Westworld TV show. So I thought, okay, with that kind of pedigree, and because of Westworld and the quality of that show, I felt that sort of led some credence to the quality of this show. And I was pretty I was pretty sold on like those first few trailers. The vibe looked good. I like the setting, the tone seemed right, the armor looked nice, and there was a lot of visual indications that they were getting things solid. Even the Volt suits, which looked a little questionable at first, but once you start to get into the rhythm of them in the show, they look great. But yeah, that was my early impressions of it, like, trailer wise. How about yourself?
Well, I haven't watched myself. It's I'm going by with what people have been talking about, and from what the consensus is, it's a solid hit. Like I'm hearing from people who hasn't played the game, watching the show, and now are interested in the game, and you see the resurgence of Fallout from Fallout 1 all the way to Fallout 4, even Fallout 76 throughout Steam, getting a
Yeah.
resurgence. I guess my behavior as a consumer, I usually like wait until the hype dies down before like I jump on, and then I'll jump on it and I'll go like, wow, that's great. And everybody's like, yeah, we've been telling you like years ago. And I would go, oh, right. Yeah, I'm that person.
That's fair. I mean, with Fallout, I'm wondering if the conversation would have been different if this was week to week, as
Hmm.
opposed to having all the episodes out at once. I think a lot of people did enjoy being able to binge those episodes within that sort of first few days. It was giving me like those earlier years of Netflix where if you had a hit TV show, you could binge it all within that sort of weekend and then everyone's talking about it. That was the same sort of vibe they got for the Fallout TV show because I knew for at least a good week and a half, people were talking about this show like it was. I wouldn't say the second coming of Christ, but at least had like a lot of good vibes in the air, a lot of positivity, a lot of people saying, I watched the show, I've gone back to the games. The resurgence of Fallout content in terms of the video game stuff was ridiculous. Again, especially when you mentioned like 76, and I'm just like, yeah, isn't that the game that no one likes, or at least they like a little bit more because they actually added content back into it. But even that one had a player count resurgence of like a high degree. So Fallout Fever was out there, man. It was pretty funny.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, I think just from my perspective, I really enjoyed the show. Straight from the first episode. Obviously, I'm not going to give into spoilers, but I'll just try to talk generally. You get introduced to the three primary protagonists, and they all get given enough screen time for you to understand who they are, their plights, their quest, and then you get to see how they sort of intersect in the overall grand plot. And the show definitely starts out, I wouldn't say slow, but it's methodical in its storytelling and laying out breadcrumbs and certain elements that will become clearer as the show goes on. And by the end of it, you have a totally new perspective on everything. And then you look back on events and how certain characters and plot points came together. And it's just like, this is very effective stuff. It balances a tone between being super serious, cynical, and like, is it awful, but then being super funny, lighthearted, and quirky. The set design is really good. There's a nice balance of practical and visual elements. The cool thing is you can't really tell exactly where some of that stuff begins and ends, but you can tell that there's a fair amount of it that's done on location. There's a few like CGI based creatures that don't look as polished, but I wouldn't say they were bad. It was just, sometimes you could tell there's a little bit more blur on them, but everything looked nice. The world looked lived in. I really like the sort of color scheme and the vastness of the exterior locations. And I'd say of the characters, like Walton Goggins as the ghoul is amazing. Like I've always liked Walton Goggins, but like this is the first time he's ever had like a proper leading role in something, and he's just fabulous throughout. You really love his character whenever he shows up. He has such a charisma and magnetism about him that he just like your eyes are drawn to him whenever he's there. Ella Purnell is so good as the main protagonist of the show as well. And you have the other dude who obviously has a part to play in this as well, but I've actually forgotten both of their names. I feel terrible. But yeah, no, they're just all solid. And I think the reason I hold this show in such high regard is because I've always been more interested in video game adaptations that were able to take elements of the game but create their own unique thing. And that's not to say that there haven't been other games adaptations that tried that. We've seen that a number of times in certain films, but you can tell that they didn't have the writing quality to pull that kind of stuff off. But unlike The Last of Us, which is a great adaptation, don't get me wrong, that show technically was just copying the homework of the video game, which already had its story pretty much just laid out because it's more of a cinematic game as opposed to just being a game that you primary play. This one was able to take several elements from the games. And bearing in mind, I've never actually played any of the Fallout games. I played Fallout Shelter, which obviously isn't like a proper Fallout game, but I recognize enough of the elements when it came to, how the vaults are, how the vault dwellers operate, and when you come to raiders and the outside world and stuff like that. So seeing some of these things play out in live action was pretty cool. And I just like the fact that this show, again, had its own original plot to tell, and it was just like it was mostly made up by like the writers and creators behind the show. So I always find that stuff more exciting, especially when you pull that kind of stuff off. So that would be like my general thoughts about it. Do you have any questions?
Oh no, that's a really good point where like you have a lot of where do we draw the line on adaptation? Because like I don't know what general consensus is, but like a lot of people like would prefer to relive the medium that they play, like the story that they played or watched into a different medium exactly the way they experienced it in another medium. Whereas like that's a problematic way of seeing it, because different mediums fulfill different types. Like a book would really generally focus on the interior monologue, because that's what you read, that's what you can internalize. Whereas film, it's more focused on the visuals, because it's what you see. And the video games, it's all about like the immersion, the interaction. Where if you expect a film or a TV series to capture that entire immersion, no, like that is lost in the visual medium, because you can only see and hear. You can't play, as they would say it. Or whereas in like in a book, the introspection, whereas movies would try to put in a voiceover to have that narrative. But it's you know how many like film teachers will say, oh, don't put in a voiceover, because you're basically it's just a redundant way of showing us what we're already seeing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the one thing that I kind of liked about that statement. Because in ways where adaptation really fits well is if with comic books, because comic books, especially long form worlds that have been built upon in a continued mythos, like the Marvel 616 universe or Earth One in the DC continuum, where stories have been rehashed and redid again, remade the same exact stories, or have sequels of those arcs that we've read in a long time by different comic book writers, by
Yeah.
yeah, how writers would riff on another person's ideas, like such as X-Men, for example. You do have the Krakoa arc. It's not really, it's more of a one-shot story in Giant Size X-Men back in 1975, where they introduced, the popular X-Men characters that we know and love today, Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, into that arc of a living continent. And then now, back in 2020s, that was like the biggest X-Men story arc since, say, House of M, I would say, the last big X-Men event that they would go through. And it was a riff on an old idea, which now became this one giant Marvel, really affected the Marvel universe in such a significant way that I would say even affected the Marvel universe better than, let's say, House of M, or even like Age of the Apocalypse, where it became like a bubble arc where it happened in that, and then there were long-term repercussions, but after a while it's been forgotten. I would say Civil War had a better resonating feel towards the entire future of Marvel, where like
Mm.
a lot of the events that happened after really stemmed out of Civil War. But that's just a personal take. So yeah, like that's what I really liked about your statement about the whole adapting concepts and ideas that encompass like an original story. Whereas, as you said, Last of Us was copy and pasting what's already been seen in a video game.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I think again you can look to some of the recent successful adaptations and they do a similar thing as well. Like Arcane was mostly just pretty much devoid from the games. It mostly just made up its own thing, but operated within the rules of that world to create something new. You could say the same thing about like I think Cyberpunk was mostly original as well, but again took the rules and conventions from the games and created something of that. And even the Castlevania shows with like the OG show in Nocturne, if you know those games as well, again, I'm not like super into Castlevania, but I know about the basic plot threads of Castlevania 3 that they utilized for the first two seasons. And then in Nocturne, I can't say without getting into specifics, but with some of the stuff that they borrowed from, I think it was Rondo of Blood and was it Symphony of the Night, the way they incorporated them into the game, adaptation at least, with the Netflix show. Ooh, it was so nice. And it's the way that they can utilize these things where, it'll be a familiar character or plot element, or even the use of music at certain points. You can tell that these people are aware of what they're adapting, but they're choosing to specifically utilize these things in a way that makes sense. And it's not just throwing it in for the sake of, like, say, a wink and a nod to the audience. It's like it has purpose, but it's also playfully done at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Because like
Yeah.
at the very end of the spectrum, where we're getting into this discussion of how much of the source material could we adapt, then you have something like Ghostbusters Afterlife, where it's just hello elderberries, like, oh, let's put in like a fan service here, let's put in like a cameo here, and that's what's been kind of like the playbook of Disney Phase 4. Oh, by the way, here's something for the fans, but after a while, like it worked on us the first couple of times, and then suddenly the fans are like, okay, like, so do you have a story somewhere in there? Like, I like all. I like all, like, after a while when you're just watching for the Easter eggs and you're just watching for the after credit scenes, it's I don't know, like it's a lot of filler, and I don't like filler.
Yeah, I've had a lot of time to think back on was it even the parts of phase 4 that I quite liked, but mostly I'm just looking back on phase 5 and I'm just thinking a lot of these moments that at least even had a feeling of joy or at least elated me to some degree. Now I'm just looking back on it. Well, I come back to that and it won't have the same effect.
Hmm.
And I think it's even worse because surrounding those Easter eggs are noteworthy things that if you were clued in about the comics, they'd work for you, but you kind of need a good story and solid characters to surround it to make those special things like feel like the icing on the cake and not just like the little crumbs that you're trying to take from it. So yeah, I was just thinking back to for instance, Doctor Strange. There was like so many interesting things in there with the Illuminati and certain cameos that at the time was so special. But then you think about it a little bit more and it's just like, yeah, no, when I think about it, like that film doesn't really have much to it that I want to go back to. And then those cameos don't really have that same effect. You can tell that like there's a sort of level of manipulation there where it's just like, we think we know what you want, so we're going to put it in there and kind of hope that you're not paying attention to all the other things surrounding it. And I'm like, no, 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 I can see. And you guys need to put some work in. So especially after X-Men 97's come out, like this makes the MCU look very bad in comparison.
Hmm. Well, X-Men 97, it's like it's a bit of an anomaly in this really saturated era of adaptations, to the point where like I had a lot of free time, I had a lot of downtime, and X-Men 97 is one of those shows where the hype was real, like came from everybody else, and then me being all my snarky self going like, but what happened to Rogue's butt, Um, and you're just like, is that the only thing that's keeping you from watching it? Well, first it's the hype, and then when I'm seeing people who have watched it and are commenting how good it is, who I don't really like, not really pay attention to, but like who rarely voice out their opinion to the other. It kind of got my attention, and I had some downtime, and then I started watching it. I think when episode 6 dropped, and that was a pretty good binge watch from the first episode to the sixth. And then it gave me enough room and enough time to actually go, yeah, this is something that I would wait for every week rather than binge watch it as a whole. I could have waited to binge watch it as a whole, but I guess like I had time, and hey, well, like a series can always disappoint me. It's been a and that's been like the general like discourse and consensus for the last couple of years. I'll watch it, cool, and then I'll move on. But like X-Men 97 is something special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For me, I grew up with the show, but I never watched it in the same way that I watched Spider-Man and Batman the animated series. Those two shows like just grabbed me very easily as a child. And X-Men, even though it had a banging introduction, I don't know what it was. I think it was just the storytelling, the characters I just never properly gravitated to. So I never had that nostalgia going into 97. And during those initial, like that first trailer, when that dropped, I was thinking, okay, so clearly they've kept some of the elements of the old, animation and the tone of the dialogue and stuff like that. But I was thinking, okay, clearly they have an angle. They want to emulate that original show, but want to enhance it a little bit. So I was like, okay, we'll see. And then there was a lot of good talk about, surrounding episodes 1 and 2 of these shows. So I was like, okay, screw it. I'm going to binge the whole thing. So I ended up going back to the old show, binged all 5 seasons. And I definitely have a better respect for the show now, because the OG show, it was a fascinating beast in the sense that it took a lot of comic book material and condensed it into 20-minute segments. And while that meant certain elements of the plot or characters didn't have the same room to breathe, it was impressive how much of that they were able to condense and make it palatable for people who weren't familiar with the source material. And even though it had its soap opera drama elements, certain elements of levity and humor and some cringe and some questionable aspects when it comes to the limited animation, the voice acting, which sometimes could sound a little sexual when Charles or Jean were involved doing their like little psychic abilities. Um, I did enjoy the fact that when the stories worked, the characters you really got attached to, you got invested in their world and their plights. So when things were happening, you were emotionally invested. It is a shame that the final season is bogus because the show was originally supposed to end in season 4, but they had to commission a quick new like fifth season. So the art design is drastically different, lower in quality, and the animation is even more like limited than before. Save for a handful of episodes, that season really shouldn't exist. But yeah, it's crazy going from that to this new show where the people behind this show clearly have a lot of love for the source material and they keep the tone and characters intact, but they progress it in a natural kind of way where the audience is clearly grown up. So they've added a little bit more maturity to it, a little bit more darkness. They've added 10 minutes to the runtime, so you have just a little bit more time to breathe with these plot and character elements. Things just feel a little bit more feel right, for lack of a better term. And the animation and art direction is so good. I know some people did start to complain a little bit during the first 2 episodes that they still had some of that limited animation, especially during some of the talking based situation the characters were in. But when you get to those action scenes, good lord, the amount of detail in the lighting, the general fluidity of the movement, and the storyboarding where you get to see so many dynamic angles, stuff that they couldn't pull off in the original show, to the point where they even introduced like stuff like impact frames that you see in anime and stuff. You're like, what is going on? This show has no business looking as good as it does. And the way in which it also enhances certain characters who, at least if you're going off of the Fox live action films, have been poorly represented. The amount of people like shouting from the heavens that they were enjoying Cyclops and Storm, I'm like, yep, we have arrived.
Yeah. My experience with X-Men is a little bit different from your experience, where I grew up reading the comic books. And one thing that really drew me into the X-Men comic books is probably what drew me into anime later on in my teens. Um, it's not kiddie. It's a mature story base. Like it when I was starting to read, it was like the late '80s, way past Chris Claremont's run with all the Phoenix Saga, Inferno, Mutant Massacre, and when I started, it was X-Men 1991 when they broke off into the gold and blue teams, which is what the original X-Men series were based off on. Where the gold team was basically in defense of the base, largely a lot of it surrounding Xavier's plight, like a lot of Xavier stories, along with Jean Grey and Rogue. Whereas the blue team, they're like the strike force that travel and seek out all the things that all the dangers that affect the X-Men within the country. They usually go to Japan or fight Omega Red, or they tackle Magneto and all the big threats composed of Cyclops, Wolverine, Gambit, and those guys. Yeah, they were a lot more mature and really focused a lot on like the upstarts, basically the ones who wanted to overthrow the Hellfire Club and then all the conspiracies that really like boggled and really jogged my imagination, where I was going, wow, these are like crazy mature stories that like a 12-year-old like can try to wrap their head around. And it's like the coolest thing that I've seen and read. So when the animated series came out, I think I put up with the first season and I just went, no, this is way too kiddie for me, versus all of like all like the mature stories that they're trying to tell and all the intrigue and the politics and the backstabbing. Like I had to like create a flow chart in a notebook to like just to keep up with what's going on. And since your allowance can only make up for so much, I had to wait until like the next to binge buy a bunch of the X-Men stories when they all went on sale, you know.
Right.
And then since they had all the hologram issues, like you can't like I want the story. I want to know what happens in those hologram issues where things resolve or new episodes begin where like those I had to like really save up money for and get that well placed conclusion where I've already read like the next series because those are the cheap ones that been has been prepackaged and you buy like a bulk of them. So that was really my like take on the animated series and then now watching it way later into my life. Not going to give out how old I am. Um yeah, like it's mostly delving into the whole so bad it's good, so good it's bad, you know, like good but really bad. But rewatching the first season especially, there were like hints of how X-Men 97 came about, you know, like a lot more in the first season than the preceding seasons that follow. But though like in season 3 there were some moments of heart with for example Wolverine and Yuriko, you know, like you have those that kind of bleeds into the new X-Men 97 show. And X-Men 97 show, like when it started off, I was kind of like taken aback. Oh, like it's still kind of the old series, you know, it has that, yeah, it has that like Fox animation imprint, but then slowly it just takes another life of its own and brings me back. Like what you're saying, like it just feels right. It's the same feeling that I had reading those comics back in the day, you know, like in the 90s,
Yeah.
before like it went crazy with the whole Age of Apocalypse onslaught saga. It just lost me. That's what caused me to quit. But then, you know, those really simple, grounded stories where it's these people in shadows, these outliers who just want to live and are protecting what, you know, their right to live. And you see that in X-Men 97. Not without going to any spoiler territory. They just go into just trying to make do with all the events that happened at the end of the original animated series and living with the consequences and the ongoing plot points that happens there. And that's what it felt like. Just like when I just picked up my first X-Men comic and started in the middle of the episode, started in the middle of the issue, and you're going like, ah, this is pretty good. And then you know you go back and read up on all the old sagas, and then you continue and see like how your characters grow up, who they're attached to now, what were the histories in the past, and that's the great part about 97. Like you don't need to start with the X-Men animated series. It provides a great context. But as you said, they grew up and it's a lot more mature and yes, it does feel right.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating kind of thing because obviously when it comes to Marvel animated projects, you've had, at least in recent years, you've had them go back and create something new in the form of What If. And What If obviously was still a little beholden to the MCU because they were utilizing characters from there and bringing them into this 3D art style that had a little bit of a painted look to it, but the art direction was a little weird because the characters had this weird middle ground between sort of looking like the characters from the film, but also not, and then having some of the original characters there to voice them, and then having some other people who were regular voice actors coming in to cover them. And there were certainly interesting ideas in there, but there is nothing in there that really gets you hyped and elevated in the same way that 97 does. There is something about the way that team had clear aspirations and plans to take this original show, progress it in a way that still feels faithful to what came before, but as we said before, mature it. And this show, more so than a lot of things I've seen in a while, where I felt like it was required viewing after the end of every episode. They leave you on these intense cliffhangers where you're just like, I need to know what happens. X-Men 97 became like a drug for me week to week where I had to know what was going on. They continuously raised the stakes. That's one nice thing about watching a superhero property again, that the stakes felt real, that people were in danger, and the way in which like the trouble escalated and you're constantly on the edge of your seat just trying to figure out how people are going to figure certain things out. And I would say this is one of the sort of things where I've heard certain criticisms and I can agree to a certain degree, where this show, much like the original show, is attempting to put a lot into certain episodes where they're either drawing from multiple comic book plot lines in one episode or across the series. So that means certain things that would have at least maybe 2 or 3 episodes to breathe are condensed into 1 or 2. So there are certain moments where characters are having arcs or conversations or plot points are happening where you think, this could have gone on for a little longer. I actually wanted a little bit more room to breathe. But again, because this show is basically doing what the original did, you kind of understand that they're working within a certain time frame. And at the same time, it is impressive that despite all of these, like, quicker paced issues, this show still seems to make it work. It's just very impressive just how this whole thing is played out. And it just feels earned, the drama, the serious moments, and the humor, which is in there, but it doesn't feel forced. It's not in your face. It's not horribly cheesy and poorly timed. It's just nice.
Hmm. Yeah, going back to your original point of like taking the source material and adapting it into a uh brand new story. I think like they really did a good job of splicing up a lot of the established like canon from the comic book series. Like they even said that like the X-Men series was like um Earth something, like it's a different continuum. It's like 932, I think. I'm not too sure what the
Yeah.
number is. But yeah, like they were able to condense Inferno into one episode, which was like a multi-saga uh, X-Men arc involving Sinister, Madeline Pryor, and Jean Grey, as well as the Mutant Massacre saga, which they really delved into without going kind of crazy as like with what the comics did. But at the same time, like the last few series, like they were splicing up different like sagas and combining them into one. Um, Fatal Attractions, for example, as well as Bastion saga, for example. They were intercutting it and making it work. And what I could say is they were splicing all these original um, arcs from the source material and creating like an episode, like a coherent story based of all these source materials without becoming a copy cut and paste job, as he did say mention with The Last of Us. And I think Matthew Vaughn did an okay job doing that too with his movies, and I could see that being done here with the X-Men series. Well, Days of Future Past and First Class, I would say. But after that, you
Yeah.
know how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. The less said about that, the better, I guess. But by the time we got to like the last few episodes, because the episode 10, the season finale, aired at the time of recording a few days back. And I think within the fandom that was watching this week to week, the sense of community and hype that was online every time, this show came out with some really great moments of characters fighting or getting over like pretty traumatic incidents, or pretty much just laying the smack down on you when it comes to certain things. Again, I have to like word these things very carefully, but the emotional investment that you're able to get into this show, especially from around episode 5 onwards, is pretty insane. And while this kind of stuff has been done in different storylines over many years, the way that they're able to get it just into a 30-minute episode and make you feel, and then have everybody talk about it week to week. And for this to be these sort of almost definitive versions of these characters, because obviously we've had many different forms of X-Men, especially in the world of animation. And I don't think any of them have resonated as hard as this show has. It's found this really nice middle ground where it's familiar yet elevating. And it's really hard to like quantify my feelings with this, but when you see it and you see how effectively it's done, you can't help but just grin like a nutcase. 'Cause you're just like, they pulled
Mm.
this off, they made it work. And I also appreciate the fact that even though this is mostly an X-Men centric show, so obviously the mutants are front and center, they did find a way to introduce certain cameos. And the thing is, at first, the cameos are very light and,
Hmm.
I would say almost blink and you'll miss it kind of stuff. But then they start to make visually more obvious how much of a world that these characters, exist in.
Hmm.
And then the cameos just start to, I wouldn't say escalate, but their frequency did pick up towards the end of the show. And you're just like, this is a world that these guys are living in. And it is
Hmm.
so nice because, again, the MCU, especially during its like phase 1 to 3 days, was operating on the characters that they own. So obviously, Fox and Sony were technically out of the equation, with the exception of Sony working with Marvel to get Spider-Man into the fold. But there was always this sort of feeling that, the MCU, especially when you take into consideration their TV divisions with the ABC productions and the Netflix stuff, they all sort of operated within the same world, but they could never truly interact because of a whole load of background shenanigans and like beef between, producers of the TV and film department. Whereas in the world of animation, where those restrictions don't exactly apply, they're free to sort of create this world where these characters exist with other superheroes that you know of. And the OG show did this before. Those cameos were sneakily put in there, which they were apparently not supposed to do, but they did it as fun Easter eggs for people. But the way they've done it now, it's not only fun Easter eggs, but it also, again, makes the world just feel a little bit more expansive. And you know that there's all these other elements going on. And they're tastefully done. And when some of these ones showed up again, I can't say who they are, but the way I got up off my bed or my chair and I was just like, oh my gosh, look who that is there. Oh, man, I started to freak out.
Yeah, like that's a funny thing you should mention because I just finished season 2 of the original series yesterday, and then like, or they're gonna do the Miss Marvel thing, like with Rogue, and they did, and I was like, okay, so yeah, like the cameos are there, and they're subtle at first, and then they started to ramp up. Like looking at the thumbnails for the future episodes, I think there's like a Captain America Wolverine team up in season 5. Like yeah, I think that's the one thing that they kind of pushed, and it's nice that they let it bleed into the new series, knowing that it is a whole world, and they are continuing from what the original show did, and you can see that like the more of the X-Men universe, the Marvel universe will pop in, showing that like it's not just the Marvel universe. It's a Marvel universe, and the X-Men are just living in it, which is I don't know what that'll do for the whole MCU as a whole, but yeah, like MCU has like a hard job trying to win us all back after season phase 4 and whatever it is, this new phase that they're going through.
Yeah, I could talk more about X-Men 97 for a while, but we have other things to talk about. But I did want to touch upon an interesting element when it comes to X-Men, because during episode 4, there is a little bit of a video game segment. And I wanted to try something a little bit different, in the sense that obviously this podcast is primarily about video games that get translated into another medium in the form of, like, say, television and movies. But what if it was the other way around? Vincent has like graced our presence once again to talk about the world of video game adaptations for the X-Men. And they have had a fair few, especially back in the 90s onwards. I've only had a handful of experiences with the X-Men characters, mostly playing select number of them in, more Marvel focused games. So, you're talking about your Marvel versus Capcom games or the Marvel Ultimate Alliance games. but Vincent has like this interesting idea that he wanted to share with us. So, Vincent, if you'd like to take it away, sir.
Yeah, because we're talking about the from pixels to celluloid, right? Like where games are adapted into shows. But what about something like the X-Men, which after the TV series, they've had some of the opposite, where it went from comics to games, and it's an interesting experience trying to like play those games, and especially when it was the 16-bit era where you had like it's mostly your imagination as well where you played these games. I think my first video game that I've owned that's X-Men based was this title from the Super Nintendo, Spider-Man X-Men versus Arcade, which you play as Spider-Man, you play as Wolverine and Gambit. Those were the character, and Cyclops. I think those are the characters that I were playing, and then you go through arcades, little mini House of Horrors, kind of like the same way. Could have been Mojo, but then they went with arcade, like some random villain. Like I didn't even know, like some D tier villain from
Yeah.
the X-Men, with this like House of Horrors, and then you fight certain characters. Like the pair-ups have been kind of strange. You had Wolverine versus Apocalypse for some
Hmm.
strange reason, and then you had like Gambit versus like Green Goblin.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. And then end of the day, like it goes back to Spider-Man, who's headlining the series, where like he'll tackle all the villains that he's fought until you get into to fight Arcade. I didn't get pretty far. It was a terribly designed game, with barely little story. And yeah, like I was hungry for more X-Men content at the time because, as I said, like I really dug the comic books. Then there was this 1993 Sega Mega Drive Genesis game, X-Men, where you can control Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Cyclops, and I think was it Colossus? But I usually remember playing as Wolverine and Nightcrawler. And you basically have one level, and then you can switch between X-Men, and each character has their own use, like their own mutant powers. Wolverine was pretty much useless. The most useful character was Nightcrawler, and I didn't get pretty far because if one of your X-Men like members die, you can't use them again. And Nightcrawler is so useful that if you lose Nightcrawler early in the game, just reset it because like you're not gonna get far.
As a
I,
statement.
yeah, it was pretty funny. But the I think the X-Men game that I actually completed was this X-Men in Super Nintendo 1996. Apocalypse was supposed to be the big bad, and you play as Wolverine, Cyclops, Colossus, Gambit. There's a
Yeah.
girl there. I'm not too sure which one. You can say like I keep you choosing Wolverine, or who the useful characters were. But yeah, like in the end of the day, like you beat Apocalypse, I think in stage 5, and you have all the iconic X-Men villains, Sabretooth, whatnot. In the end, of course, Magneto will be the final big bad for some reason, because it has to be Magneto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
Typical.
really yeah, not really sure what the story was, but I think everything stemmed from the arcade game in the early 1990. I don't know if you played that one, where you play as like Golden Age. Oh, I wouldn't say Golden Age, Silver Age X-Men, Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm, Dazzler, Colossus, Nightcrawler. I don't think Storm was there. I think it was Dazzler, or maybe Storm was there. But yeah, anyway, you fight probably like a version of Nimrod. I'm not really sure. I just remember like waiting, just sitting there in the arcades, waiting for like some good players to play, and then
Right.
when they get far enough, you stick a token in and then join in.
Nice.
I
Nice.
was
Okay. Yeah.
so bad, and then you can see like the angry players just going, "What are you doing?" Like joining us, and just like, but yeah, like that's my foray into the side-scrolling X-Men. And as you said, like a lot of your experiences with X-Men is from the video games.
Yeah. Yeah. And
For video games, the fighting games, I mean.
yeah. So hold on, just to go back to the arcade game. Is that the one where Magneto has that famous line, like, is it X-Men Welcome to Die? I swear that's the
Yeah,
one, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think I messed around with that briefly at a convention at one point because, sometimes when you go to like these big conventions, they'll have like a separate area for arcade machines for you to get to experience these things. Because in my town, we had like a little arcade in our old cinema, but it was literally, sort of games of the era. So by the time I grew up and we actually had an arcade that we could utilize, we're talking around maybe 98, 99. So by that point, we were messing around with stuff like Tekken 3 and Time Crisis and I think was it Street Fighter Third Strike and stuff like that. So I never got to experience some of these like, hardcore fun games from like the early 90s or even the 80s, for instance. I didn't get to play like Pac-Man until I was in my 20s because it was in like this arcade machine at this convention back in 2014, that and Dig Dug, and I was like, you know what, these games are all right. But yeah, with the X-Men, in my experience, I think the first time I messed around with them was with I want to say my cousin had like the first Marvel vs. Capcom game and messing around with that. But because it still applied with Street Fighter logic, I've never been great at the command inputs. So, I was just happy to jump around and press buttons and have a good time. But I never got to really get good at any of those games. Um, I think, yeah, once I got to the Ultimate Alliance games, even though because of annoying console exclusivity nonsense, there were certain characters that were exclusive to the Xbox 360, PS3, Wii, and DS, and the PlayStation 2 as well. So I think the PlayStation 2 and Wii had the same character sets, but there the 360 really got the best deal out of the set of them because they had additional downloadable characters that I don't think were available on other consoles as well. So I'm like, that's just rude. But at the time, I didn't use too many of the X-Men characters in there. I think, you start off with Wolverine as one of the primary X-Men that you get to utilize in the game. And I messed around with Colossus and trying to think about who else was in there. I think I stuck with Iceman because Iceman had a pretty good power set. He had a nice combination of projectiles and all characters had like a double jump, but if your character had a certain type of special ability, then you'd either be able to fly or in the case of Iceman, he'd be able to create his little icicle slides that he could just like sort of glide along the area with. So sometimes it was faster than the flying character, so you can literally just create your little continuous like spurt of ice flying all over the place. He was really cool. So yeah, Bobby was fun in that game. And by the time you got to Ultimate Alliance 3, which was a console exclusive for the Switch, which I know some people are still salty about to this day, it does have pretty much like one of the best set of X-Men characters you can utilize. I was really happy using characters like Scarlet Witch or Nightcrawler. Wolverine's okay in the game, but it's funny, you said that he was useless in the older games. He's actually kind of useless in this one compared to like some of the other characters who just have a better power set. And because you have these synergy-based attacks where two or more characters, if they're in the same space, you can combine attacks and just create these AoE attacks that are just ridiculous. Even though it does take a hit to the frame rate on a few occasions. But yeah, no, it's been fun to be able to play a colorful looking game where the characters look like they do from the comics and utilize some of those abilities in that kind of way as well. So I would like to have a new like X-Men game. It
Did you play the X-Men Children of the Atom fighting game, like where it all started?
No, no. I never knew anybody who owned it, and I never got to an arcade. I'm not sure if it was an arcade-based game or not, but I feel like it might have been.
It was an
Uh,
arcade, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So by that time, I don't think we would have had one within my hometown to check it out, unfortunately. But I've obviously seen footage of it online and it looks great.
Yeah, it was the fun part about that, like a lot of the X-Men or Marvel versus Capcom games were really based off on that one. It started with an X-Men, Cyclops, Wolverine, again, Storm, Iceman, and on the villain side you had Magneto, you had Silver Samurai, you had Spiral. Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody seems to like their favorite characters were like Iceman because he's so cheap. Like you'll just blast away and freeze enemies and blast away, kind of like a Sub-Zero type of thing. Cyclops is more like the combo guy. Like he actually moves exactly like Captain America from the Marvel games. Um,
Aha.
yeah, and then of course you had Wolverine, who I think by Marvel versus Capcom he was really cheap. Like he had like a 3-button air combo.
Damn, okay.
Yeah, and yeah, everybody used them because it's just like 1, 2, 3, then like middle punch all the way until like then you can get like an easy 12-hit combo just by doing that.
Oh, that's jokes. Um,
Yeah.
and thinking about those fighting games, it was interesting, especially with again going back to episode 4, which again we can't go into too much details about, but it was funny in '97 the video game references that they took from the games and put it back into the show. So there were certain moves from Rogue and Cyclops and certain stuff going on with Jubilee where they were basically taking some of those moments or like animation from the game and then putting it back into the animated show. So it's an interesting sort of synergy where you have these characters from the comics, they get adapted into animation, then go and create a sort of new life of their own within the world of video games. But
Hmm.
then those moments become iconic to the point where fans of those are taking those moments from the video games and then putting it back into the animation.
Yeah. Like yeah, I remember the like using like I remember reading a guide because like Rogue was a playable character in X-Men Children of the Atom, and every time
Yeah.
she uses that kiss move, she
Oh yeah.
basically like takes somebody's powers and uses it, and then it's like oh if she does this on Cyclops, she gets the optic blast. She does it on Iceman, she gets like the ice the ice blast thing, and then Wolverine she gets like a drill claw, like the most useless thing. But yeah, like it's pretty well adapted in terms of getting their powers and using it in terms of it was a dream like back in I would say like 97, 98 when I started playing it in the arcades where I'm like oh you can get to play as the X-Men, and then Marvel superheroes came out with the Infinity Gauntlet and, yeah, and then it just got out of hand.
Yeah. Those games always had like really great like character art for like the not only the character select screens but also when you checked out the instruction manuals or the books or the cover art. I remember a handful of times when I was in certain shops and some of these games got re-releases on later consoles and I'm like I would love to pick this up. I'm not good at this genre of game but I would like to pick it up because the art looks so damn cool and even the character animations from the fighting games especially they have very distinctive character animation where even their idle animations or their taunts or the way they do attacks they're very like iconic and distinctive poses and it's funny to see again how that sort of bled out from those games and found their way back into the new animated projects. It's like it's really nice.
Hmm. And with the Midnight Suns game coming out, I think 2 years ago, three
Yeah, I
years
think
ago.
it's around that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
around that time. I'd really like to see it happen for the X-Men, for example. Like, of course, you have some of their more popular characters like Wolverine, like making an appearance and doing their thing. But at least it had like some sort of story. And with Sony coming up with the Wolverine, like I don't know when that Wolverine game's coming soon because of the unfortunate leak incident from Sucker Punch. It'd be a nice foray into that world, right? Like something to look forward to, I guess, in terms of like the X universe, right?
Yeah, yeah, like that Insomniac game has a lot of hype
Sucker
surrounding it.
Punch, sorry, Insomniac.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, hold on. No, no, yeah, I got it, yeah. But yeah, obviously there's like I don't know if it's still there now, but there was footage, or I think it was alpha footage of that game that got dropped, and I was just thinking if this was about maybe 20 years ago when I was still, was looking for game info and was desperate to see anything, I probably would have run around online trying to find that footage. But for me, I'm just one of those guys that's patient enough to just say, I'll take the game when it's good and ready when it's ready to be presented, because that's proper representation of what we're getting. But yeah, the Wolverine game sounds like fun, but I would like to see I doubt that they'd ever do it, but if we could either get like a re-release or like a new version of the X-Men Legends games that came out back in the early 2000s, because they were the predecessor to the Marvel Ultimate Alliance games. And I think I ended up playing at least, I think the second X-Men Legends game at a friend's house. And at the time, I was just like, this is okay, but I'm not again as attached to the X-Men characters as I am like a chunk of the other ones. But when I ended up playing Marvel Ultimate Alliance, the funny thing was, that game had certain moments in between the gameplay where you got to have your like base of operations at various different points in the game. You go from like Stark Tower to Asgard to Atlantis and stuff like that. And each place has its sort of base where you get to talk to characters and they give you information about their lives. So it's almost like a mini history lesson of certain people. So for me, as someone who didn't know a ton about some of these characters, you get to learn through conversation, but also these little quizzes that they have where you earn points depending on whether you get the answers right or wrong. So every right answer you get experience points. So there was stuff I learned about, the X-Men, especially when it comes to the space side of things, or certain things about character histories or incidences and stuff like that. And it's just like, this is pretty sick, man. I like the fact when you have games that will inform you about a certain character's history in a brief yet impactful way where you can say, okay, I know at least enough about this character now than I did before. And it makes you want to seek out additional information. So yeah, man, I would like to see that sort of co-op based game come back, because you not only get to mess around with multiple characters and probably get like a nice visual design to go with it, but you could have these sort of bits of downtime in between to just learn about characters and get like some of that comic book history. I think a lot of recent superhero games have been pretty good about doing that kind of thing. Well, not counting that like weird Suicide Squad game that came out, but yeah.
Yeah, Midnight Suns did a really good job with that, like having a base of operations, and then your nameless characters interact with the Marvel characters that are featured, and you get a bit of their past, you get a bit of their backstory, how it relates to the current story at hand, right? So.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to touch upon within the video game element of this X-Men discussion?
Yeah, I think we've covered it. Yeah, we've just gone through the history of it all, and like I wasn't like big on to the game scene during like the PS2 era, so I didn't really get a lot of exposure to that. And then like recent years, with Marvel trying to get into the video game side of things, yeah, with Spider-Man and like Avengers, for example, but not a lot of X-Men really. Like I guess since like the X-Men kind of died down you know, after X-Men 3 really, and it was pretty much relegated to the background. We really didn't get a lot of property into gaming at this point in time. So
Nice.
any future adaptations you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I would say there are a few. Now, my primary one is probably going to be more specific to me than anything else. But I think the big one for me is on December 20th, we'll have the third entry in the Sonic the Hedgehog films from Jeff Fowler. And, depending on who you talk to, these films are either fine, great, or, not so good. Because obviously Sonic is one of those sort of live action CG hybrid films where the anthropomorphic CG characters are front and center, but they have to share the screen time with humans. And obviously, because of the limited stuff you can do with the real world, and obviously dealing with like the balance of like live action and animation as well, the CGI is expensive, so you can only do so much. But I feel like they've done a good job of incorporating the best elements of what made these characters work in the games. And you can see, especially going from 1 to 2, how they started to take the video game lore and, again, much like Fallout before, take all those established elements that I've known for years, but rejigger it and streamline it in a way where it works for the film. And you're just like, yo, this is pretty sick. These guys clearly understand what they're doing. And while these films still have a few issues with pacing, the use of the human characters, and their lack of video game music, like they seem to be afraid of for some reason, I have enjoyed my time, especially with the second film, because it had so many elements from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and certain elements of history for Sonic Adventure and Sonic Heroes towards the end. And the teaser trailer, like the tease at the end of the film that was going to be showing off Shadow the Hedgehog, probably one of my favorite post-credits things I've ever seen for a while. So I was stupidly giddy when that came out. So now that we live in a world where we know that Keanu Reeves, after many moons of fan speculation and hoping, is actually going to be cast as a character, I am very curious to see how they're going to adapt this plot line for Sonic Adventure 2, which is the primary sort of thing that these guys are drawing from, which is definitely one of the more notable stories within the Sonic mythos. It has a little bit more darkness and some maturity that goes on there, essentially. So it's just like, yo, okay, how are they going to make this work? If they stick the landing, this could be genuinely a great adaptation. I just hope that they put the video game music in there. I hope they don't downplay some of these elements, and we'll have a good time. But I would say that's the primary one I'm looking forward to. I'm also curious to know what's going on with that Return to Silent Hill film, because when Konami decided to open the vault and actually start making, new stuff for the Silent Hill property, I was very curious to see what they were going to do. Obviously, there was Ascension that came out that didn't turn out to be too good, but you have at least the F game, I want to say Silent Hill F, which was the one that had that sort of teaser trailer with all the weird flowers and freaky imagery and stuff that kind of gave me Annihilation kind of vibes. But then there was also the announcement about Return to Silent Hill. And in terms of the film adaptations of Silent Hill, they were actually sort of cult films within the fandom of the people that saw them. I think Silent Hill, at least the 2006 first film, was actually pretty solid in terms of capturing the vibe and the creepy element of the games. The visual imagery was solid. They even got some of the original music, and the composer, I think it's Akira Yamaoka, is that how you say his name? I think, to lend his music along with the other composer. I think it's Jeff Danner or something. But that film was also a good case of borrowing heavily from the games, but rejiggering a few things. My only issue is that when they went to the last part of that film, things just went sideways. And the end period of the original Silent Hill was pretty weird, but this film went in some really freaky directions in a way where I'm just like, you didn't have to do that. This is needlessly weird, but I'd say 2/3 of a really solid adaptation that I think just needed a little bit of rejiggering in order for it to work. But I would like to see what a modern Silent Hill would look like. And they've got the director who made that first film coming back for this new adaptation, and it stars Jeremy Irvine and someone else, but I can't remember who they are. But I want to see what a modern sort of survival horror adaptation looks like, because goodness knows Resident Evil sort of tried and fell on their face twice. And I can't live like this anymore. I don't. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Three times.
Because I'm literally just thinking more so in the last couple of years where we had to
Oh,
endure
yeah.
Welcome to Raccoon City and the
Netflix. Yeah.
Oh God, Christ Almighty.
Well, I guess you had a bit of a soft spot for that the W.S. Anderson adaptation.
Oh man, I mean, I'd say I don't mind the first two films, but everything after that just sort of gets weird. And I wouldn't say weird as in is it freaky, but it's sort of just the continuity between films just escalates into weird and strange places. They bring in video game characters randomly and sporadically who sometimes are similar to their video game counterparts, but most times aren't. And it's very over the top weird in that sort of way where Snyder has his own style of filmmaking, but so does Mr. Anderson as well. And by the time it's over, you're just like, I'm tired. Just turn it off. So yeah, it's strange that we live in a world where those are the better films, even though they are hardly adapting the source material. So I hope that Silent Hill fares a little better, because they haven't had so much time being messed around in terms of being adapted. So
yeah,
but yeah, I'd say, I don't know, obviously there's Borderlands coming out not too long from now. I've played a bit of Borderlands 1 and 2 with my uncle, but I've never really played the games. I know about the visual aesthetic and the tone, but it seems like this film is trying to capture that, but the trailers really try to capture that Guardians of the Galaxy kind of energy, and I'm not so keen on that, and the humor and the choice of casting for some of the people is bizarre. So I don't know. We'll see. I'll watch. I'm not expecting to be blown away. I'm not expected to have too much of a good time, but yeah. And that's how I feel. I mean, how about you? Oh, wait, I totally forgot about Arcane season 2. That's supposed to be dropping last side of this year as well. So that's probably going to be pretty hype.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Well,
like, what about
the
you?
yeah, well, the new stills for The Last of Us season 2 just came out, and
Oh yeah, of course.
I'm really curious how they're gonna handle season 2, because
Mm,
I predict a bit of a divisive contrast when it finally drops. And for the people who don't know the source material, The Last of Us Part 2 was pretty divisive in its own way, having
yeah.
dropped during the pandemic and having its own fair share of fans and haters, almost in an equal fashion. I don't even know like whose side is which. Because like I know a fair bit of people who really love the game, and I know quite a lot of people who also won't even touch it, won't even give it a chance.
Yeah, and because of the way that time works between the first and second game, obviously the actors can't age that much in the real world. So I'm wondering if they're going to do anything to address that period of time in between the first and second season, or if they're literally just going to make it a shorter space of time and change a few things around to suit this TV show. Because obviously the TV show's already a few taken a few liberties, I guess, with the original source material, changing a few
Hmm.
scenarios for how situation played out for characters or plot points that were either streamlined or pretty much ignored from the game. So they could easily just jump up time in terms of the events that take place between season 1 and season 2. But
Hmm.
in terms of how certain scenarios are going to play out, again, I have to speak around it. But if you know, you know. And if they do it, how are they going to do it? And will the internet set ablaze again? That's what
Hmm.
I'm because Vincent, you probably saw it when the before The Last of Us Part 2 dropped, there was the whole leak
The
of
leak,
like
yeah.
those, and everybody lost their minds.
Hmm.
And then the actual game played out, and people lost their minds again. And it was a constant series of conversations that went online for, I'd say, months. There were times where I was just on the internet and certain sections of people were still bitching about this thing. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I understand the nature of what the plot was trying to do, but at the same time, it's just like the execution of it, and it's it's nuanced, but at the same time, it's just like some of the story execution did leave a little to be desired for me. And then it's
Hmm.
just like, okay, um, you either way, like this thing was gonna make people angry. And
Hmm.
now I'm just wondering, because you don't have the same amount of time to play a game as you do to watch a TV show, I feel like the emotion and reaction will come a lot faster.
Hmm.
So I don't know, man. This is gonna be funny.
Well, there was this little show called Game of Thrones that elicited quite like the same amount of anger, where certain seasons people have stopped watching the series completely because certain characters were certain directions were taken, right? So
Right. No, of
yeah.
course.
Whereas like when I read the books, like it was a shock, but it didn't really affect me the same way. But then again, like Game of Thrones was a show where like, no one was safe. And knowing that going in, yeah, don't get too attached.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm kind of curious just to see how it plays out. Um, and there's also that Tomb Raider anime that was like announced. I think was it late last year alongside that Devil May Cry like announcement, which I think is coming a little later, but
Hmm.
the animated Tomb Raider that has our old friend Peggy Carter, Haley Atwell playing the
Hmm.
character, well at least voicing her at least anyway. So with these animated adaptations, they have been pretty decent. Especially when they come from Netflix, because they have had like pretty solid writing and a good animation team to, bring these things to life. I will be curious to see what they're going to do with Lara, because obviously Lara Croft has had like some questionable adaptations
Hmm.
for a while now. And obviously the character and the types of games she's been in has like changed a great deal since her first inception back in like the late 90s. Because obviously you had the Angelina Jolie films, which I think both of those have their own merits, but overall they just don't quite scratch the itch. And then you have the Alicia Vikander film from 2017 or was it 2018? Crap, I can't remember which year it was.
Yeah, within that
Um,
time period, yeah.
but yeah, that one attempted to basically adapt the plot from the reboot game from 2013, I believe, but basically stripped out so many of the great elements of it when it came to the plot, characters, and the vibe of it, and stripped it down to, remember all of these key moments from the game and add a bunch of weird things about Lara being in the UK before she goes on this trip. And Walton Goggins, he did what he could with like the materials given, but I felt like the adaptation, it looked and sounded enough like the games for you to, if you wanted to be happy with that surface level stuff, then that's fine. But I feel like the true content of that game that made it so much more enjoyable was really just stripped out of it, which left that adaptation just feeling a little hollow for me. Although there's a lot of people that seem to like it, but there was also the announcement that there's the Amazon like produced upcoming series that's coming from Phoebe Waller-Bridge. So I'm very curious to see what that's going to look like.
Hmm.
But yeah, I guess that's all like the major adaptation that's coming out this year, because everything else is sort of looking towards 2025 and beyond.
Hmm.
You've got that Minecraft film that like, has Jack Black voicing the main character, which is just like kind of funny. And gosh, you've still got like the Five Nights at Freddy's sequel, the Mario sequel that was announced like not too long ago on Mario Day, which is coming out I think in 2026, which
Hmm.
was a guarantee considering how much that film made.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, just after that, everything is sort of just up in the air in terms of like new things. I mean, I know they're making a Sims movie, but that still seems like it's a ways off. And oh wait, is season 2 happening for Twisted Metal? Huh, interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
I still didn't finish that. I saw the first few episodes and I thought it was fine, but I don't have any attachment to the original game, so I couldn't tell you whether that was a good thing or not. But Anthony Mackie was doing his thing, and that woman from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, she was all right in it as well. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But I guess that's
we'll see.
about it.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
I,
Yeah.
I guess that's it for another
That
episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. And what did you think about the stuff that we talked about? Are you a fan of Fallout or not? Did you like the joys and the highs and lows of X-Men 97? And have you played any of the X-Men video games? If so, just share your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit me up on Twitter where I'm Hyperson55. The podcast is pretty much everywhere where podcasts can be found, especially on Spotify. Thankfully, the link finally worked because I had the podcast on there for ages, but that first episode wouldn't show up. And I was like, but I attached it, I linked it, it didn't show up, but it's on Spotify now, and we're on YouTube as well. So subscribe and join the wonderful little fan base that I'm trying to build up here. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Vincent, do you have any parting words?
Nothing much. Thanks for having me.
So yeah, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is me and Vincent signing out.